Hello, welcome to Jessie at Home. In this video I am going to show you how to make this little flower out of this fabric yarn. There are several different types of fabric yarn and different companies that make it. There's this fabric kind that is a solid piece of fabric like this. This in this case is a chiffon, which is see-through and very soft. There's also the net style yarn, which you can still use the same pattern for. You might have to adjust how many holes that you go through. In the case of the fabric yarn, you're actually using every single hole. With a net yarn, you might use like every other hole because the spacing is different. But I'm going to show you how to make this little flower with the fabric yarn. You will need for this pattern about 2 yards of the fabric yarn. Mine has holes about every 1.5 inches apart. If the holes are wider apart, you're going to need a little bit more than 2 yards, but a kind that has holes about 1.5 inches apart will work with about 2 yards of fabric. You need a crochet hook. The size of the crochet hook, there's not an exact size that you need. It needs to be small enough that it still goes through the hole, but big enough so that things don't fall off of it when you use it. So in my case, I happen to be using an H hook, but you can go a few sizes smaller and maybe 1 or 2 sizes larger and still be fine. Whatever is comfortable for you. The hook does not affect the gauge with this yarn. It's how far apart the holes are that affects the gauge. You're also going to need a yarn needle to do some finishing and of course scissors. So let's make this little flower. It's actually quite simple. To start off with, you're going to put your hook in the 4th hole. So there's 1, 2, 3, 4. Sometimes the little fabric is still kind of hanging out in the hole, but whatever, no big deal. You can clip it off or whatever. 1, 2, 3, 4. Put your hook in the 4th hole. And now you're going to keep on counting to 4. You're going to put your hook through 4 more holes. 1, 2, 3, and 4. And now you're going to pull the last one that you put on your hook through the rest of them. Alright? And that's all you're going to do. You're going to put 4 more holes. Put your hook through 4 more. 1, 2, 3, 4. And again, you're going to pull this last one through the rest of them. Now you've done that twice, right? I'm going to do that a total of 10 times. I'll show you a couple more. So again, we go through 1, 2, 3, and then this is number 4. And what I find is that if I pinch the rest of them, the rest of the loops on my hook, it's a little bit easier to pull that 4th loop through. That's the 3rd time I do it. Let me show you one more time. 1, 2, 3, 4, and sometimes you don't get it through all 4. Just figure out how to fix things. There we go. Now I've done that 4 times, and I'm going to continue going into 4 holes, pull through, 4 holes, pull through, until I've done that a total of 10 times. I have now pulled my 10th loop through. So I inserted my hook into 4 holes, pulled the last hole through everything else on the hook 10 times, and I have this little bit of ruffle. If you so wanted, you could actually keep doing this all the way to the end of your skein of yarn and make yourself a little ruffle scarf if that was what you wanted. But that's not what we want here. What we want here is to make a flower. So what we're going to do now, keep that hook in that loop, or else the whole thing will come undone. Now we're going to clip. You're going to count over 1, 2, 3 empty holes, and then you're just going to go ahead and clip your yarn. Okay? And now we're going to finish it off by taking this tail of yarn and kind of smushing it together, wrapping it over your hook and pulling it through the last loop that you have on your hook. Okay, and that ends it off nicely so that it won't come unraveled. Now you need to thread one end or the other. Really not a big deal which one. I usually end up using the beginning tail just because it's not, you see how it's not pulled tightly like the end tail is, but really in the end it's not going to matter which one you use. You're going to thread one of them onto a yarn needle, and I just stick a corner through a yarn needle with a really nice large hole, which is easier to do when I'm looking at the yarn instead of at the camera. Sorry. Let me actually look at the yarn and not the screen, and it'll probably work a little bit better that way. Then again, maybe not. There we go. Alright. So just make sure you've got it onto your, in the eye of your yarn needle here. And now you want to kind of untwist things so that you can see this little flat strip that holds all of your stitches. You see all those little chain stitches that have happened on the top of your piece here. There's that ruffle that goes underneath, and here's all the little chains. Now what you're going to do is take your yarn needle and just slip it underneath the first chain. There'll be a nice little opening there. See, look at that. I can fit my thumb through it. It's a pretty nice size opening right underneath one of those chains. Okay, and now you can skip one. You don't have to go through every one, and come back through the next one in the opposite direction. So that time I went towards me. Now I'm going to skip one and go underneath the next one, go away from me. Skip one, go underneath the next one towards me. And make sure you're really going underneath and going in that hole. You don't want to use a needle with a point, because you don't want to accidentally go through the fabric, because you won't be able to pull the tail through if you've actually sewn through anything. You're going in the space. Okay, now there's only one loop left, and I'm going to go underneath that. All right, and now you can take your needle off and just give it a nice pull. You can see you've got your flower there. Okay, so that's all it really takes to make this flower. And the nice thing is you now have these two ends, which if you want to attach this to something you've made, something that you've already like knit or crochet, for example, you've already knitted or crocheted something, you want to attach this flower onto it, all you have to do is take these two ends and grab a crochet hook and place the flower wherever you want it on your piece. Put your crochet hook from the back of the piece into the front, pull one of the ends, pull it through, and then go over a couple stitches, put your hook in, pull this through again, so you've got these little pieces on the inside now, and you can just tie it on. I still recommend sewing through it with a needle and thread, with some sewing thread, once or twice, you know, a couple times, and tying it off just to be safe. Because if you just tie the fabric yarn and leave it at that, it might work itself out at some point. You can tie this onto a hairband. You can sew it or hot glue it onto a pin back to make a little pin. If you're just going to use it as is, I do usually give myself at least a little square knot to make sure that those ends aren't going to come off. Like if you're putting this onto a hairband, you can do that. And you can even leave the little ends hanging and maybe just cut them at an angle. You know how sometimes you see the little ribbons cut at an angle? I don't know that my scissors are really quite sharp enough for something like this. But let's see. I have a little sticky spot on my scissors. There we go. But you could do that if you tied that around a hairband, just like that, and it's done. You see how quick, imagine how quickly you could make a bunch of these, and with only 2 yards each, that's a really great little stocking stuffers. If you want to give them to some of the little girls that, you know, maybe you have a daughter and she has a bunch of little friends that you want to give these to. They're good if you're doing a little craft show or whatever. Really quick, really easy, and when you're only using 2 yards per flower, really inexpensive as well. Alright, so there you have it, little fabric yarn bows. I hope you enjoyed that, and go forth and make some pretty bows.